Everybody, welcome to another Live at the Waterholes session. I will be your host today. My name is Ben Coley, and as always, I will be very happy to answer any and all of your questions because it is live at the Waterhole. I am live, and please do send in comments and thoughts on anything that you see. It's always lovely to hear from you wonderful people who are watching. And we have started out the afternoon at Tembe Elephant Park with Africam's camera there. And what a great way to start the day with an elephant having a bit of a dip. Almost completely submerging himself there. I'm assuming him. Looks like a group of bulls that have come down for a drink. You can see this one has definitely got a good idea on a hot day. Gonna have a good splish splash around. Looking at the coloration of the others, it doesn't look like anybody else has yet thought to join him, but we'll see. Often some of the younger individuals will go in and have a nice little paddle and a splish splash around. Don't often see the big adults doing it so much. A little bit too much maturity for such frivolity like that, but always delightful to watch these Ellies having a bit of a swim. Even if he does want to hide behind that one solitary tree. You can see that little trunk popping up like a periscope. Of course, they are able to breathe through their trunks and will use it like a snorkel and are capable of swimming over large distances if they have to. It has been recorded when it is necessary. Surprisingly buoyant for a large animal. Particularly if you think about how heavy the bones are. I don't know if any of you have been fortunate enough to a situation where you've felt the weight of an elephant's bones, particularly those in the front legs. Very solid, very heavy, very important for carrying all of that weight. And so, particularly on those front legs, has to support the weight of that head and trunk and the weight of the tusks, which could be a few hundred kilograms themselves in a really big, impressive individual bull. Let's say there is plenty of space in that body and plenty of air, not to mention the skull, of course, which is not the same sort of calciferous bone, full of air pockets just to help make it a little bit lighter and potentially also help with picking up and interpreting seismic vibrations of those low frequency infrasonic rumbles that elephants are well known to communicate. As we've had a few messages coming through, thank you very much for those. Rosalind McConnell saying hi to everybody. Good afternoon, Rosalind. If it is afternoon for you, of course, we are broadcasting all over the world, so different time zones. Mercedes Bean saying greetings to everybody and have a happy Saturday. Plus, you're saying great to begin the show with elephants. Yeah, let's see what else we've got. Always nice to start with Ellie's. Very common this time of year to see elephants coming down during the heat of sort of midday and the early afternoon to make use of these resources. Gaydon, you're referring to that elephant with the tip of her trunk missing. Wanting to know how that would happen. Well, unfortunately, we sort of discussed this the other day when I was on. A lot of elephants do fall foul to snares. That's rather incredibly unpleasant thing that snares are. You could argue that it's people just looking to catch the occasional antelope to feed themselves and to their family, which is hard to begrudge. But unfortunately, with snares, they are very much non-specific in whom or what they catch. They're usually placed along game paths because that is where the animals. Oh, we've got another one coming in for a bit of a play. Because that's where the animals generally are. Obviously, it's designed to catch things like antelopes or smaller rodents through the neck as they are going along game trails. Unfortunately, pretty much all animals use game trails. That's why they are kept open because it is simply easier to walk on a game trail than it is to blunder through the bush and deal with thorns and rocks and other obstacles. So they become like little animal highways, and everything, including elephants, will take them. And it just takes one misplaced placement of that trunk to accidentally get it caught in a snare. And being wire and being incredibly strong, the elephant pulls, the wire tightens, and it can quite literally cut through the flesh. Unfortunately, we see it often, particularly with predators. We've seen it with hyena, we've seen it very recently with leopard, but many elephants do fall foul to a snare, unfortunately. But thankfully, so they're usually pretty adaptable in continuing to live their lives despite the handicap. But I guess you have no choice. But yeah, very unfortunate to see. And yeah, I've seen it many times, particularly up in the north of Kruger, Punda Maria, Pafuri, that area. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see elephants with trunk damage due to the level of subsistence poaching that happens up there, particularly with the problems that have been faced by Mozambique and Zimbabwe over the last few decades. People desperate for food and trying to take matters into their own hands. Well, I suppose if Rudyard Kipling was right, maybe that elephant had its trunk grabbed by a crocodile. You never know. Has been recorded, particularly on young individuals. It's very nice to see a big mature bull having a play in the water, despite what I just said, that they don't often go in. Hudson agreed, yeah, warming up. And we've had some very warm days. It was a day, was it on Tuesday here? It almost felt like summer. And yes, it's still warm here in winter, but the ambient temperature isn't quite so bad. And we're lacking a bit of humidity. But Tuesday evening was, or Tuesday day, it almost felt like a summer's day with the humid temperatures that accompanied just the heat of the sun. There were a lot more bugs around all of a sudden. I've noticed over the last few days the fiery neck nightjars, the square-tailed nightjars have started to cool now. So it does look as if the animals are waking up and that we might have a premature end to winter in the low Lowveld at least. So I was also down in the Eastern Cape last week and it was still pretty chilly down there. Gillian, I wouldn't say there are specific insects that show up during the hotter seasons, but it's pretty much all insects show up during the hotter seasons and the damper seasons. Most insects become active as we come into summer with the rains and the heat and the humidity. So we'll see an influx of everything. The dung beetles will be back. We will get what we call the Christmas beetles, as we call them out here, which are kind of chafer beetles that abound over the Christmas period. Now, it looks like we had a bit of a problem at Tembe, but that's all right because at Juma we've also got some elephants. There's one who's just decided that the day is just far too much. It's a Saturday afternoon, and I'm going to have a bit of a rest. Don't worry, everybody, that is not a casualty. That is just a young elephant taking a moment. So, Gillian, back to your question. Yeah, I mean, it's just insects in general. We get more mosquitoes, we get more beetles, we get obviously at certain times of the year we have the massive influx of the alates, the winged termites, and the winged ants that come out, usually again with the first rains. So we'll see all sorts of animals, or insects, I should say. That's what's also decided this is a brilliant idea. They're really interesting if you like insects, but they can be very difficult. Many a night drive can become quite a stressful process because it's being attracted to the spotlight. If you're stationary as a sighting, it's hot and humid after dark, you get absolutely inundated with bugs. We often wear sort of see-through glasses, just those plastic glasses, almost like goggles to protect our eyes because there are so many insects around, and you have to be careful when speaking so that you don't swallow too many bugs. But really interesting if you like poking around at the insect world and trying to figure out what everything is. There's such a ridiculous diversity of them. Will keep you busy for lifetimes. Well, if this is the matriarch, she's obviously decided it's time to move on, and I think the other ones have sprung up in anticipation. We're going to begrudgingly follow shortly, I would think. Nice to see some activity on Juma. I should be back there towards the end of November for a few weeks. I'm very, very excited to get back. See if I can still remember the road network and meet some of the new characters who have appeared during my absence. And these are obviously the three young boys who are just lagging at the back and causing mischief. Oh, and a giraffe looking on as well. Kim, where do elephants go during winter? That sounds like a joke. There should be a punchline in there somewhere. They don't go anywhere, Kim. To be honest, they'll generally stay in an area so long as there is sufficient resources available. So elephants do go on sort of migrations, but more the bulls that'll travel bigger distances. Generally speaking, breeding herds will stay within what we call a home range. They don't want to travel too far. They've got little ones who haven't got quite the same energy levels, so they have to remain relatively sedentary, but they can migrate and they can move big distance. They have to if the watering holes dry up or there is absolutely no food available. They'll be forced to move to pastures greener, as it were. So difficult to say where they go, but they will always go somewhere where there is sufficient water more than anything else. Remember, a home range is very flexible. It's not demarcated. It's not scent mark. It's not defended against other individuals. So you can end up with lots of family groups occupying the same area if the resources are sufficient. But as I say, if a waterhole was to dry up, then a group of elephants that you might have been seeing very regularly for a prolonged period of time will be forced to move on. They have great water requirements. That's very cool. Two of Africa's largest mammals in and amongst one another. giraffe sort of floating in between the two little groups of elephants. You can see these two young Illies at the back, probably thick as thieves. They look identically aged, will have grown up together, and a huge bond, I'm sure, between them. Even if they are, I'm assuming they're both boys, and the fact that they're loitering at the back. But even if they separate and go their separate ways, those bonds will remain there for years. And even if they were to meet up 20 years later, they would definitely recognize one another. And you'd see the most beautiful um, I always struggle for words on this show. Um, sort of thing when they rendezvous up and they meet up with one another. You know, a great sort of meeting or greeting ritual if they did bump into each other in later life. This is a magnificent bull giraffe. Certainly, he's very, very well formed and put together. Big, muscular front quarters, big, thick neck. I'd say this is a very dominant giraffe in this area. But again, also just a home range, not a territorial animal. Seems to have a little bit of a tick there. Keeps sort of twitching his head to the left. Don't normally see that with giraffe. Whether it's flies irritating him, maybe he's got a little injury on his head or his neck, which picked at or irritated by the presence of little insects. I suppose this time of year it's a good idea to stop and take advantage of any fresh foliage that you find. Of course, there is lots of green in the picture there. You can see all the magic guarri bushes in the foreground and off to the right, but you'll notice that the animals generally don't eat that at all. The leaves are very, very waxy, very, very high tannin content, which is poisonous in large amounts to animals. It's a tree's chemical defense mechanism. You can see very, very few things eat the magic guarri leaves, which is very, very solid. So that waxy coating also makes them very fire resistant. They are used by local people to fight fires, sort of pick branches and used as fire beaters, also as brooms, and of course the classic toothbrush, which they are used for, where the wooded part. So if you cut off a branch of that guarri, the wooded part will sort of fray open. You can sort of chew it in your teeth or crush it in your sort of multi-tool, and still used to this day to scrape plaque off the teeth for local or in local communities, and it's surprisingly effective. Also, some antibacterial properties. The tannins is very good for your mouth in general as well, and thought also possibly used in cave paintings. Different sized branches, of course, giving you different sized brushes for ancient people to depict things on the roofs of their caves or on the walls of their caves using things like blood and animal fats and extracts from plants and fruits and things. Riley, no, so giraffes don't migrate. They have no need to. Again, just like we were saying with the elephants, if there were no resources, they would be able to travel relatively large distances. They're far less water dependent than an elephant. Different digestion system, of course. We often see them chewing the cud, which makes them a ruminant animal. And if you've ever seen giraffe droppings compared to elephant droppings, there's a ridiculous size difference. So giraffes very, very good at processing that food and extracting all of the nutrients and moisture. So they'll drink when they can, but quite capable of going relatively long periods without water. But there are no great giraffe migrations in Africa, although that is a bit of a shame because that would be pretty amazing to see. But I don't think we fully really understand the movements and the structure of a giraffe. It's one of my pet peeves within guiding that when we do the different social structures of animals, like a matriarchy and hyenas and elephants, and we talk about home ranges and territories or family groups or monogamous pairs, and giraffes are always just sort of lumped together as temporary associations, which I see as man's way of requiring their behavior to be pigeonholed into something. But we don't fully understand it yet. We think they communicate over much bigger distances than we at once thought, just by visual cues because they tower above the tree line. So it's very hard to know whether are you seeing an individual or is that individual part of a sort of a loose aggregation of slightly more related animals in terms of their physical location as opposed to maybe genetically. But I don't think we fully understand the social structure and the social dynamics of giraffe, even still today. So we've got a few more greetings come in. Andrew the video guy was saying good afternoon from a sun-kissed Durban where it's 30 degrees. That's probably about what it is here in Hoedspruit today as well. Jive Bunny from Somerset in the UK. Well, I know you've had some very warm temperatures up to the 30-degree mark over the last few days. So I've no idea what it's doing today, but I trust it is a nice day in Somerset. But it seems it's a cloudy Cape Town. Greetings to Harriet Hodgin, who's in Cape Town, greeting myself and the crew. I've got Jordan in my ear, who's helping me navigate the cameras today. Elijah, other animals with loose social structures. Well, I suppose that's a rather subjective term as to what is a loose social structure, but the only animal that I'm aware of that falls into this temporary association bracket is the giraffe. Most others do seem to have something a little bit more stable. If you think of hyenas and elephants and lions and rhinos and buffaloes, I'm sure there are others, Elijah, but I can't think of any off the top of my head that are sort of equal to that we consider the giraffe having. If one does pop into my head, I'll let you know, or if anyone has any suggestions, do please send them in. My brain cannot file through every mammal I'm aware of and check their social structure for memory just at the drop of a hat, unfortunately. It's the problem with guiding over long periods of time. Our brains get filled with so much extraneous information that we have to filter through it sometimes and find it on demand. Was actually lucky enough to go on a walk in the Manuletti Game Reserve a couple of days ago, and we had some lovely interpretations from our guide Marius, and we looked at bits of droppings of birds and investigated elephant dung up close and personal. And we also found the cocoon of a bag moth, which was rather nice to see. They're responsible for making some incredible little structures. The females at least are flightless throughout their life, and they kind of construct themselves a sleeping bag, which is then decorated by acacia thorns or pieces of rock, little bits of gravel or little bits of wood, um, all sorts of different things that you can find, but they sort of camouflage the sleeping bag, and then they pull themselves around in it, carrying the sleeping bag with them through their entire life, and they never come out of it at all. They mate in it, they pupate in it, but even when they pupate, they don't develop wings and become a fully fledged moth. They go through some changes, but they still remain in that bag for the duration of their lives. And even when they are gravid and have been or have fertilized eggs within them, when it's time to lay their eggs, apparently, in some species at least, they basically die and then the little ones hatch inside the mother and sort of eat their way out. So her last sacrifice is the ultimate one, giving her nutrition, oh, a bit of a standoff, giving her nutrition to her soon to be newborn youngsters. Just wonder if this young elephant's considering his options here. And the giraffe has decided better of it, rather lead with your head held high. Hello, Joanne Mello. Welcome as well. I'm glad you could join us. Happy Cat Day. Yep, cats will always be nice. Yes, sorry about my little bagworm tangent, but it's so nice to stop and look at some of the smaller things and say, with the rains coming and the temperatures increasing, we do or are lucky enough to have all of these weird and wonderful insects and smaller creatures to go and examine and try and understand. Oh, Caden, don't feel bad when you see a lonely giraffe. I'm sure he's okay. He's comfortable with what he's doing, and say there may be some others in the vicinity that we're just not aware of. But I do sort of sense he's tiptoeing around here. It's almost sort of he's trying to negotiate a minefield or something. He's got elephants everywhere, and so always a good idea to be respectful and mindful of an elephant's personal space. We also had a lovely brief encounter with elephants on foot as well. We saw them from quite a long way off, and the wind was not in our favour. The wind was carrying our scent towards the elephants, so they were very much aware of us. And it was very interesting. At one point, there was a big gust of wind as we were watching these elephants from the other side of a drainage line, probably a good 100 meters away. We had plenty of safety, say because we were aware the wind was not in our favour, but it was very interesting to watch their behaviour. One of the big females obviously got wind of us, and she stopped and spread her ears and looked in our direction and had her trunk up like a periscope, obviously just analysed and then made the decision that we were not too close, we were no obvious threat, and within sort of 10-15 seconds she'd gone back to feeding, and the whole herd, without showing any sort of distress, very slowly, while still feeding, just sort of changed their angle and started to put a little bit more and more distance between us. But it was lovely to see the engagement and the interaction with the elephants to our presence, and how that information was transmitted through the herd silently, and how all the behavior just subtly changed. Well, we'll see, Nicky, if he goes down for a drink. He did have a brief drink earlier, was disturbed by a curious adolescent elephant who came down and gave him a good look. And I think the giraffe thought, well, maybe I'll make myself scarce, but perhaps the lure of water is too much, because it does look as if he might go back for seconds. He certainly didn't have a prolonged drink earlier. Well, you might get your wish, Nicky. The giraffe is back at the water's edge, just keeping an eye on this elephant thrashing around in the mud, covering her calf as well. I wonder if that's the same young elephant who's going to come for another little investigation. No, it looks as if he's going to bypass the giraffe. He's probably got a little bit of FOMO of all the other ones splashing around in the mud there. See if he goes to join them. I'm not quite sure what's got these youngsters moving, but yeah, the giraffe just maybe deciding to take a step back. Don't want to get too involved. Lenny, you're asking, is there a way to tell a male from a female Egyptian goose? To my knowledge, Lenny, no. Not just from a visual perspective. There's no sexual dimorphism between the two species. I don't think there's any difference in size, or certainly isn't a noticeable difference. I've seen many, many Egyptian geese over the years. The only surefire way is by listening to them. They do make very different noises. The male is more of a hiss, whereas the female is more of a quack. So the noisy ones you hear are the girls when someone's flying overhead. But no, to my knowledge, there is no visual difference between the two. Jive buddy, yeah. There's Eddie's running to water. Very, very amusing to see. But that was lovely to spend a little bit of time at Juma. We don't seem to spend much time here at the camera during these sessions. But it sounds like we've also got a giraffe at Cat Eye Pan. So let's maybe go and have a look at that one and see if he's got a slightly less stressful chance to have a drink. So we've come a little further north, Oliphants West Game Reserve and Afrikaans camera at Cat Eye Pan. So part of the Greater Kruger National Park, just like Juma is, but probably maybe 100 kilometers north there or thereabouts. Sea looks very dry and arid there as well this time of year. Not much pickings for this female giraffe. Now, don't stick your head behind the bush. Amazing how such a big animal can disappear behind a tiny tree, isn't it? But nice to see a little bit of vegetation on these acacias. Of course, these trees will have access or be benefiting from the water in the surrounding area and possibly be a little bit more nutritious than the other ones further afield. But look at those fearsome looking thorns slash spines. I still get very confused as to whether they're supposed to be thorns or spines. So we'll say one and the same thing for today. But in person, not quite as formidable perhaps as they look. If you actually go and touch one, they're quite brittle. You can easily break it and bend it in your fingers. But used for toothpicks, amongst other things. Something like the spike thorns, which have more substantial, or in terms of sort of thickness and consistency, interesting cultural use for those. That when people were making drums and dry out animal skin and stretch them over a hollowed out piece of wood, and often those skins would be affixed by using those spines. So almost like being sewn in or being used as nails, I suppose. Well, looks like the giraffe is heading from us. We will optimistically assume that the giraffe had had a drink before we arrived at the pan. Doesn't seem to be under any great pressure. No reason why she shouldn't have had a drink by now. See if we can find anything else hiding at the waterhole. Often it's very easy to turn up to these places and say, oh, there's nothing there. But actually, if you look closer, there's a terrapin in the water just on the left. Oh, its head just disappeared underneath. Also, did notice on our walk in Manuleti, some of the trees that we did have some a little bit of drizzle of maybe last week. With the rising temperatures, maybe everything beginning to get a little bit of an early start for the onset of spring here in the southern hemisphere. Just seeing if we can spot any movement. The human eye is very, very susceptible to movement. We can see a rabbit twitch its ears for about 80 meters. And so often when you think there's nothing there, if you just sit and watch, it's like birding. Sometimes you go and you think, oh, there's no birds. But if you sit still and just wait for your eye to pick up movement, all of a sudden you might notice that there are many things sharing the area with you that we would have otherwise have not seen. I see I had a question a little bit earlier. I'm just trying to see who it was from about the Perseid meteor shower, which of course peaked last week. Penelope Kenyon, it was you saying, have I seen the pictures from meteor showers over Stonehenge? Um, I have. Oh, well, there's something on the left. We've got an elephant come to join us. See, it's always worth being patient. I have seen some of those pictures, Penelope Kenyon. Some of them I don't necessarily trust are 100% legitimate. You have to be so careful these days with AI stuff, um, satellite trails, and the like. It wasn't a very good show for us down here in the southern hemisphere. It, unfortunately, as normal for the Perseid meteor shower at the moment, um, seemed to coincide with a relatively bright moon phase. But I was out, I did events, 3 or 4 events last week, so I spent quite a lot of time looking at the sky, and I saw very, very few shooting stars, which was a bit of a shame. But the Perseids are known for often being quite sort of fast and faint meteorites because meteors, sorry, because it's little pieces of ice predominantly which burn up very quickly in the atmosphere. But it's also just not a great place to view it from for us in the southern hemisphere. It is far better in the northern hemisphere normally. Um, Best time to view it here is early in the morning. As the name suggests, the Perseids. Most of the meteors seem to emanate from the constellation Perseus, which doesn't rise very high above the horizon for us. It's more of a northern hemisphere constellation. So we are not ideally positioned for that one, unfortunately. So no, I didn't get a very good view. Did see a few nice shooting stars over the course of the week, a couple of nice big ones that were sort of went quite a long way across the sky and went greenish in color as they were interacting with the lower atmosphere, but didn't get a great show. Happy sunny Saturday to you, Canine Girl. Glad you could join us. And Granny Mango, no, I didn't study astronomy. I just find it fascinating and have read lots about it and spent enjoying the night sky. But no, no formal qualification yet. I might do in the future. But maths and physics were never my strongest point, and most astronomy proper courses involve a lot of both, which which I'm rather scared of. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to get too embroiled in the figures. I particularly enjoy the cultural aspect of it. In Eastern cultural astronomy, the Perseid meteor shower that we have just experienced is said to represent the tears of the two lovers represented by Vega and Altair in the northern part of the sky. On some years, they don't get to meet, they don't get to cross the Milky Way that splits between the two of them. And if we have a particularly large or prominent meteor shower, it's said to be their tears falling down from the heavens, or possibly tears of joy for the one evening a year that they do get to spend with each other. Nara S, you're asking about the Lion's Gate portal. It's not something I'm very knowledgeable on, Nara, to be honest. I'm aware of such things, um, but I would be not confident in sort of discussing it in any way, shape, or form. But thank you. It'll give me something to go and have a look at. Um, Generally, for those of you who don't know what the Lion's Gate portal is, it's something to do with the alignments of Sirius and of Leo in the night sky. So part of the sort of cultural significance and spirituality aspect of alignment of stars and things. So more akin, I suppose, to the zodiac signs and the behavioral or personality trait based information that one may or may not be able to gather from such things. Um, but I don't probably think that the animals would be affected by that necessarily. Of course, the movement of the heavens most definitely does affect animals in terms of helping them understand different seasons due to the length of sunlight, the different seasons. We know that predators do well on darker evenings because the prey can't see them as well. But whether or not there are behavioral changes associated with it, um, not that I'm aware of that there has been any statistically significant research to back it up. So let's leave it at that. Giovanni, you're right. This nice low camera angle leads to some, or gives us some lovely visuals of these elephants, so we can almost look up at them. This one looks slightly bothered by something. We had a little bit of a head flap earlier. He keeps glancing around. Don't know if there are any other elephants in the area, perhaps. He doesn't look quite as comfortable and relaxed as he could do. Maybe it's that little starling that's bothering him. Lady Macbeth, you're saying that this camera is at leopard eye level, hence the name cat eye pan. Well, that would make sense if that is the case. How lovely would it be to have a leopard stroll past the camera at head height and stop and give us a little look? It's always lovely if you've got a trap cam set up, and the leopard comes to investigate the camera and you get some amazing close-ups of like eyes and whiskers and spot patterns. Very intimate moments that we can see on this camera that we, or these cameras that we otherwise potentially would not be able to view. She does look a bit distracted, this elephant. He's fiddling, can't decide what he wants to do. Well, we might get a nice walk by from him here. Hey, big boy. Have a glance off to the left. He does look a little bit unsure about something. Maybe there's a strange smell emanating from that side. Hard to see which way the wind is blowing from a camera. We'd need to look at the clouds or the ripples of the water or the vegetation moving. But maybe there's just a subtle scent in the air. Maybe some lions close by that's distracting him, some other elephants, maybe even some people. Amazing how thin an elephant is when you sort of look at it from the back in a straight line, considering its massive bulk. I think I'm right in saying that actually a white rhino is wider than an elephant in extreme cases, but it's a weird thing to think about, but potentially true. We're just going to have a little pan around to the left and see if we can see anything that might be causing this elephant to give a sort of a cursory glance into that location. Ah, there we go. Look, there is an elephant in the background, quite far back. Good spot, Nadine. Jordan has left the building now, and I have Nadine assisting me from Johannesburg. But yes, she spotted some elephants. So whether or not that's what this one is aware of, not quite sure, but potentially some other elephants moving around in the bushes off to the left, maybe, and just hearing something occasionally. Oh, there was a little thing that suddenly went scuttling across. I didn't quite see if it was a squirrel or a dwarf mongoose. I just caught it out the corner of my eye. But more life here than we realise. This elephant just seems to be doing laps. And Penelope Kenyon, I'm assuming that Cat Pan is pumped. I can't say for sure, but you can see there's concrete structures there, so there's obviously been a man-made influence. So I would be assume that it is pumped. Best way to check would be where do the elephants keep drinking from, because they will generally always drink from where the pipe is coming into the to the dam. Ah, my waterhole, get back. So yeah, possibly fighting it. Possibly, I would think the pipe is there. Is there? I think these two are debating who gets access to it. Is that why you were being a little bit unsure before, that you knew you were going to have to fight for your fresh water? You can see the other one was looking rather submissive in its posture. But yeah, I'm sure the pipe must be there. You can sort of see him attaching his trunk to something. You can almost see then the rhythm tractions of the trunk as he's sucking water up before drinking. The other one, I think, has decided he's going to have to wait his turn. But here comes the next one. There's a bit of a queue forming now. People queuing at the bar. Oh. Yeah, this one's getting quite protective over his water source. So I'm going to put it down to the behavior that we saw, that he was aware that other elephants were coming and he didn't want to relinquish his spot. First come, first served, and all that. Always interesting at a time like this, you get to sort of figure out the hierarchy within these bachelor groups. Well, Lady Macbeth, you're saying you've never seen Cat Eye Pan dry, and you've been watching it since it was first came online. Well, that would definitely suggest that it is being pumped in that case. And Marco, yes, the elephants are wasting a bit of water by spraying it out, but it's because they know that this is a constant source of water. There is no great pressure on them to savor every last drop of that lovely elixir that they are getting hold of. If this was a more naturally occurring pan and there wasn't much water, you would see that they are far, far more careful in the application of the drink itself, and they will be spilling nothing. But in situations where there is a plentiful supply, then they sort of enjoy it. You always get the impression that elephants do have fun whilst they're drinking. They delight in the experience. But yeah, if the chips are down and it's serious, then they will be far more careful. Interesting situation. Lots of relatively evenly sized elephants, so a lot of hierarchy will be based on previous interactions between them. Confidence levels, aggression, testosterone levels when not in must. Obviously, an elephant in must will be a slightly different situation. Cat Fan, he is losing control over the waterhole. To be honest, I'm not quite sure now which was the original one. I think the occupation of the pipe has changed hands a few times in the last 10 minutes or so. But this youngster's taking his opportunity as well. Once he formed an alliance with this larger individual who seems to be quite happy to share. Maybe they're related. Brothers, perhaps? This one I'm going to stand as far away as possible and reach all the way in with my trunk just so I don't get too close. Nice little submissive communication there of touching the trunk to the mouth. feel the one drinking now is the biggest of all the elephants here at the moment, so maybe he's brought a little bit of stability to this situation. The youngsters taking their opportunity, everybody else patiently waiting their turn. Okay, I think we're going to head back to Tenby Elephant Park and see what's happening with the Eddies down there. Definitely a marked contrast in the amount of green that you can see in these shots. Much closer to the coast over here, of course, a little bit more humid air. Some lovely vibrant greens at that. Always different shades. Beautiful. Oh, it's nice just to sit and watch these interactions. That was fascinating at Cat-Eyed Pan. We tend to just think of, well, the elephants come down to have a drink, but when you watch them carefully, due to that sort of social nature and heightened intelligence and emotional intelligence of that, or with that, very, very interesting to try and figure out the pecking orders and the individual relationships between individual animals. Why studying elephants is so rewarding and can tell us so much about them. There's a lot less infighting going on amongst this group, but with so much water to choose from, I guess there is not quite the need. Everybody's spread out, found their own little corner of paradise around the dam here at Tenby. Josh, no, I've never been to Tenby Elephant Park. It's one of a growing area of places that I have to visit at some point. I haven't spent much time um, in the far east of the country. I worked in KwaZulu-Natal, but only for around about a year at a lodge called Tunda about 10 or 12 years ago. It was actually, well, it would have been 2008 or 2009, somewhere around then. Wow, 15 years ago, showing my age now. But never really had much of a chance to go and visit the surrounding areas because I was basically living in Johannesburg at the time. So as soon as it was off days, would take the sort of 6 hour drive back to Johannesburg, spend the week there, and then return for work again. I did get down to St. Lucia a few times because we used to do sort of trips down there to go and see the hippos at St. Lucia because we didn't have any hippos on the reserve at the time. I know Tunda has changed a lot since I've been there. It's a lot bigger than it used to be in terms of the amount of land that they have access to. But no, never got up to Tenby. And so my trip to the Eastern Cape last week or 10 days ago was probably the first time I've been to the Eastern Cape in about 8 or 9 years as well. And even then, I just did the garden route. I didn't really go and visit reserves. So there are many places that I still need to get to. But you're right, Penelope Kenyon, it is a beautiful setting and one that I should probably try and get to at some point. Add it to everywhere else, including the Karoo and Sutherland and South Luangwa in Zimbabwe, which I'm desperate to get to. Addo Elephant Park, I've never been to. So I finally got to visit Shamwari recently, but there are many, many places into the Drakensberg, full-blooded mountains down there on the southeastern side as well. Somewhere else I'd like to get to. So I'm going to be busy over the next few years, I think. Sure. Carrie, you're asking which bird besides the dove species have I seen all over my travels? Um, well, yeah, the doves do seem to be everywhere, but sort of things like the bulbul's always sing up to keep cropping up. Down in Shamwari, I was amazed with just how many mouse birds we saw. The speckled mouse bird and the red-eyed mouse bird seem to be everywhere. It is in my head that will be the mouse bird reserve from now on. Um, what else? I suppose just things like sort of batises and hoopoes, the babblers, cisticulars. There were lots of pipits down there because it was nice and open. I don't like pipits. They're very, very difficult to identify if they're not calling. Pipits and larks and warblers, those ones, they're always around, but I find myself never being 100% sure as to exactly which one I'm looking at, unless it has some very obvious diagnostic features. But the doves certainly do seem to be everywhere. Highly successful bird. And Egyptian geese. Oh, and there were hardy-dars down the Eastern Cape as well, of course. So yeah, I think those are the main ones that seem to keep cropping up. Lots of starlings as well. There seem to be starlings dotted across the country, pretty much all extremes. Particularly the glossy starling or the Cape starling now. Of course, it used to be a Cape glossy starling, and now apparently the name has just changed to Cape starling, which I've never quite understood because you've taken away the most characteristic feature of the bird in that it is glossy and stuck with the word Cape. And it certainly occurs in other areas than just the Cape. But we shan't get into the etymology of birds and bird naming. That is all done for a good reason, for research and taxonomic purposes. I suppose that's a hard one for me to answer, having not been to Tembe. I can only really tell you what I've seen here. Obviously, um, it's a slightly more heavily vegetated area, so we've seen lots of inyalas down here. But in terms of any sort of other specific mammals or birds, unfortunately, I'm not really qualified to say. I mean, there are some lovely areas in Maputoland and in KwaZulu-Natal and the eastern side of the country in terms of the sand forest environment that you sometimes get, more heavily vegetated foresty environment leads itself to definitely some different bird species. Down in KZN, I've seen things like white-eared barbets and obviously the Neisner turacos. What else? Green twin spots, pink-throated twin spots. Those sorts of forest weaver. I quite like forest weaver as well. So yeah, lots of different bird species you could find there, but actually coming to the waterhole, I doubt. Oh, there's a warthog. Well, there goes past. You sometimes get warthogs here as well. Taking advantage of some of that greener grass down by the water's edge. a young male on the far right there, almost a little bit too young to be fully disassociated with his breeding herd. They might be doing this idea that youngsters sort of go off for little trips with the adults just to start learning, and then they'll go back to their breeding herd again at some point. Seems to be quite content, half-heartedly chasing some impalas around there. It is peaceful, Nicky. Yeah, very peaceful. It's just nice to sit back and watch in silence sometimes. Just soak it all in. Impala Ram looking around a little bit guiltily as he's harassing this female, checking her reproductive situation. I suppose names of birds that have changed recently. Well, it depends what you call recently, really, and it does happen fairly regularly. There have been many sort of over the last uh, decade or so that I've had to deal with and still struggle to. Um, Puffback shrike versus a blackback puffback. I'm honestly still not quite sure which is the new name and which is the old name, but the probably the most famous or most common bird species who've had their names changed would be the Cape glossy starling is now just the Cape starling. The Cape turtle dove is no longer a Cape turtle dove; it's now a ring-necked dove. Those are two very, very common species that we've all in the guiding community have had to sort of try and remember to change accordingly. What else is there? I'm sure there are a few. The green wood hoopoe used to be a red-billed wood hoopoe. There was some talk of a batalier being turned to a short-tailed eagle. I'm not sure whether that one has actually sort of been made official yet. The black-shouldered kite is now a black-winged kite. That one's also been very difficult to retrain the brain to remember. Greenback heron is now a striated heron. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but those are ones that sort of popped into my head when you asked the question. Of course, the magpie shrike used to be a long-tailed shrike, but that was changed quite a long time ago now. Oop. That's how you scratch the parts that you struggle to reach sometimes, I suppose. Another one that came up when we were in Manuletti, we saw an African harrier hawk, which I instinctively called a gymnogene as well, as opposed to its. But again, that's been around for decades now. I think that's changed, but it's so hard when you've learnt one thing to then reprogram the brain. Yes, Penelope Kenyon. If you've got the old books, then some of those names are going to be out of date. But say there is this sort of on-running joke that all these name changes are just done by the um, Ornithological Society to encourage us to buy new books with updated names. But say there is a reason behind it. It's basically done because there are so many bird species in the world, and different areas have different common names for them. Will always be the same taxonomical name, but another one that's just popped into my head, the dark cap bulbul, which used to be a black-eyed bulbul, that was changed many years ago. Apparently, because I think I'm right in saying that it occurs in 17 different African countries, but not everybody called it the same thing. So it was sort of part of the idea that if you're doing research on a particular animal and you want to speak to Professor X, well, that's something like the X-Men, in Angola about them, if you speak to him and say, "Have you seen any black-eyed bulbuls?" he might say no because he calls them something else. So by changing the name and trying to make it universally used as the common name, it just makes it easier to communicate over populations of birds in different areas. Roger, any new names that I prefer? Of the ones I've mentioned, no, not really. But there's probably some anti-recency bias associated with that. There probably are some that would make sense in my head if I thought about it, but there are so many to choose from. So 900 and something different species. I'd have to go through them all and think, but there probably are some that have changed for good reason. But Jive Bunny, as you said, as long as we see them, that's enough. What they're called, I suppose, is fairly irrelevant. But for those of us who do like keeping lists, it's good to keep on top of it. Oh, seems like it might be time to move on. Okay, well, I think we're going to chance our arm over in Namibia. Sounds like we've got some more illies. So let's head right over to the western side of the continent. Ah, it's pool party time in Okakoyu. These two having a good bit of fun in there. Why not? The whole place to yourself. All the mud being kicked up from their antics as well, staining the watercolor around them, but very good for circulating all the nutrients in that water, stopping sediment from building up too much. Jive Bunny, you're saying there's a lone elephant who you think has been orphaned at Okakoyu. That's unfortunate, but it does happen and can happen. But say if he's part of a good solid herd structure, then hopefully he will be adopted to some extent. It does happen with elephants from time to time, so we'll cross fingers that he is okay or she. Might be a little bit harder if he was to come from a different family group, of course, far more likely to happen with related individuals. So a few of you have been mentioning this orphaned elephant who seems to have been dubbed Little Joe from Jive Bunny, so you're saying. And Lady Macbeth said that you think that he seems to have appeared to have joined a herd a couple of days ago, and that maybe had been accepted, so possibly some recognition from other family members, extended family members. But let's hope he's okay wherever he is. I'm not sure if this is him, if he has any distinguishing characteristics. But so certainly to be expected if it was if he was would can't speak if he was to be adopted by a cousin or an auntie, that would be quite normal, but I think slightly less normal to be adopted by a random female from a completely different breeding herd. But you never know. Say elephants are they have very, very complex social structure and definitely an awful lot of maternal instinct in there. Cat fan, you're saying it's a perfect scene to watch with a cup of coffee. If I drank coffee, I would agree with you, but it is a lovely scene, regardless, to just enjoy. I always feel great pleasure for these elephants as well. It's such a dry and harsh environment out there, particularly in and around Etosha, that it must be so much fun for them to come and visit this, like a day out at the water park. And I'm often surprised we don't get more of them in the water enjoying the depths and cooling off completely, getting rid of some of that dust from their bodies. Are you going to have a proper roll around, or are you content just standing waist height? These two certainly the protagonists. The one on the left, there was a little bit of interaction, but obviously doesn't feel quite the same level of interaction. A little bit smaller, maybe doesn't want to get too involved with the bigger ones in the water, just in case. All under the watchful gaze of the adults here. Small one here, though, probably not much more than a year old, getting a bit of a shower. Some big females in this group, though. It's lovely to see how similarly aged elephants tend to gravitate together, particularly under these sorts of situations. Lots of herd safety at the moment. They're tolerated by the adults, but keeping a watchful eye. Just a friendly little nudge there not to go too deep. These two still having fun in the middle there. We've got a giraffe looking on as well. Seems to be the order of the day. Giraffes watching over them. Canine girl, if the matriarch was to be lost to some unfortunate event, certainly another one will pick up the mantle. Normally, the next oldest and most knowledgeable of the group. If there are sisters, it'll often be the sister of the matriarch who will take over, or obviously they'll all be related, the females anyway, but an auntie or a cousin. But generally, it'll be done on age and knowledge because of all that important information that's been passed down through generations as to where to go to find water, where to go to find food at specific times of the year. So you generally won't find a young one being nominated. I will generally go to the oldest and most next oldest and most knowledgeable within the family group. Quite how the democratic election process goes, I'm not sure, or whether it's preordained. But to my knowledge, there's certainly no arguments about it, or there's no hierarchy that needs to be established. It's just knowledge within the group of the next most senior female. Looks like a jacana in the background there as well, making his way along the shore. Be careful with all these things, great giants wandering around you. I'm just having a quick discussion in my ear with Nadine saying, we think this little one looks a little bit on the porky side. It's quite a distended belly. It may just be the light and the shadows from the angle we're looking at him at, but he does look quite, uh, well, porky, as I said. But it's possible that he's got a little bit of a stomach upset, perhaps. Maybe he's got a little bit of a bloatedness going on, a build-up of gas, perhaps. But he does look a little bit like, or has a slightly extended stomach. Maybe he's got a secret stash of plants that he's not sharing with the rest of the group. But we won't mention it too much, just in case he's sensitive about it. Jive Bunny, you think that might be little Joe? Well, I shall take your word for it. It's possible if he hasn't been eating properly that, say, that would manifest in some digestive disorder that could have led to a slightly bloated stomach or a build-up of bacteria. Well, if it is you, little Joe, I hope you find a new home with the current herd. You've got me worried now, Jive. I wonder where the rest of the elephant's gone. That is poor little Joe. Wonder what must have happened, whether he just got separated from the herd. I don't know. But I shall have to do a little bit of digging as to whether or not a sort of a malnutrition or a lack, maybe the lack of enzymes that he would still be getting from mother's milk would manifest in any sort of physiological changes in the stomach and the surrounding area. See, elephants are prone to some digestive disorders, but their ability to self-medicate, which obviously comes from knowledge passed on from other individuals, If a youngster isn't getting that education, then it's possible he doesn't know how to fix a sort of a parasitic problem within the stomach. We've got my brain whirring, but I'm still happy to see that there are some other elephants around. Orchid Fairy, I'm glad you've enjoyed a great day. It has been all about the elephants today at Tembe and here at Okakoyu, and also at Cat-Eyed Pan, very much been dominated by elephants. But that's a pretty good way to spend a day. Shay, man, I'm really sad for this little elephant. It's quite a forlorn picture now. At least he's got access to water, though. That is the main thing. Without that, he'd be in real trouble. So hopefully he can find an adoptive herd if he hasn't already. But wild speculation at the moment. But nature can sometimes be cruel. Penelope Kenyon, I'm glad you also enjoyed the show. We're almost out of time, unfortunately. We've only got about a minute or so left, but remember to stay tuned and get all the latest on what's going to happen this afternoon over our different locations. I will be back again tomorrow, and well, hopefully we can check in on little Joe again and see how he's doing. And in the meantime, I shall try and do a little bit of reading on orphaned Ellies in the wild and what may or may not happen to them, and we can discuss that in a bit more detail tomorrow. But I hope you have enjoyed the show today. It's been full of elephants, as we've said. Always good to see some pool parties. And wherever you're doing, and whatever you or wherever you are, whatever you're doing for the rest of the day, I hope your day is also filled with happy elephant memories and great experiences. And yeah, I will catch up with you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central African time, and we will do another visit to all the different locations that we've got. Until then, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will catch up with you tomorrow.
Good afternoon, and welcome to On Safari. This is the show where we look at the highlights from the last 24 hours. My name is Amy, and yes, this is On Safari.